Hi, so I'm Rhonda. We're going to talk about the different mistakes that you want to avoid when you are working with a flip, because it can happen. So the first thing that you want to do is to set a budget, and then you want to make sure that it's a reasonable budget. So with a budget, you want to make sure that you include at least 6 months or more worth of mortgage payments, interest, insurance, PMI, or whatever the like is for unexpected expenses. I worked on a basement house that I ended up holding it for 6 months, which is the longest time that I've ever held a property. And with that particular property, I ran across several issues with that particular property. So to give you a little bit of background, I purchased the property. I think it was for about $70,000, which is how much I paid for it, but it appraised for $215,000. And it needed about $40,000 worth of work in it. So I quickly purchased it, and there was going to be a great room for profit with it. But I did not realize that a basement is not something. I knew that it had a basement, but I did not realize how much work I was going to have to do with that basement. And so that basement ended up costing me a little bit more than what I expected. And luckily, I planned and prepared for the different expenses that may have come about. We went over budget from what I originally thought that we were going to do, but luckily I saved and prepared for that, and it ended up working out. I was able to sell it. But some of the mistakes that I made along the way, I not only learned from it, but it's something that it will make me remember the next time when I consider buying a house. First of all, in the state of Louisiana, we don't typically have basements because it's very moist here, it's very humid here, and we just don't have a need for basements. We don't have hurricanes, or we don't have, not too often, I should say, but we just don't have a need for it here because the water tables are so high here. So that's mistake number one. I should have looked at it. The second mistake that I made was, I looked at it, but I should have considered those options. The second mistake that I made is that because the basement, the problem that we were having in the basement is that water was getting in. And I just assumed that it was getting in from the sidewalk because the sidewalk was a little uneven or off level. So I just figured that it was from the sidewalk. Well, we repaired the sidewalk area, but the water kept still getting in. Okay, so maybe it's the other side of the sidewalk. Water kept still getting in. So I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So needless to say, I wind up having to put 2 French drains in, one in the front and one in the back. Also, after I did the French drains, which was very costly, I ended up getting some special paint, which ended up working perfectly. And I'll link that down in the bio. But with that particular paint, it was a specialized paint. It was a special sealant paint. And you've seen the commercials where the guy is saying, it does not get wet. I think he's like in a boat or something like that, and he's sealing it. And so luckily they actually have a can of paint. It's kind of expensive, but it's worth it. To me, it's a little bit expensive, but it's worth it, and it actually did work. And it has many more uses besides sealing up basements, but you can seal up pretty much anything with it, and it's very thick, and it comes in different colors. So we were able to use that, and we were finally able to seal it, and we were finally able to sell it. That was the only problem that we really had with the house. I couldn't even keep it had so much odor coming from it because it kept getting humid down there, and it was just, oh my God, it was just awful. That was absolutely, I would have to say, my worst flip that I've ever done. But it was the flip that actually taught me the most. The second thing that I learned from this flip is about right of way, so to speak. So on the same property, I knew that this particular property had a septic tank. Well, with the septic tank, I looked at it. That's not very uncommon here in Louisiana. We have septic tanks here in a lot of different areas, especially in our rural areas. So we have septic tanks, and didn't think anything of it. So looked at the septic tank. I got the septic tank checked, and we went on. So we were under contract with a buyer. And so with that buyer, the buyer said, okay, well, I want a good inspection report from the city saying that the septic tank is okay. Okay. So we go to get the inspection done. The health department steps in and they say, well, no, something is going on with the septic tank. And did you know that the septic tank is when it releases the fluids from the septic tank that is flowing into your neighbor's property? So I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. What else could possibly happen? So we talked to the neighbor, and the neighbor said, well, and luckily the neighbor was actually, this was a heir property. So you had two siblings that actually lived on the property, and they all agreed to sell, and they all shared this one driveway. Well, their father was the one who actually built the house, and he was the one who did everything himself. So since he did everything himself, he did it in the way that he wanted to do it. So it wasn't going on their particular property, but it was going on another neighbor's property who refused to give me the right of way for that to continue to drain on his property. Of course, I didn't know that it was draining on his property, and it was just like some seepage from it, and it wasn't like a lot. It's no different than when rain falls, but he still did not want to give that right away. So long story short, I had to get an attorney involved. I had to do all these type of things that just added up quickly. Luckily, the inspector said that if we paid to, reroute the pipes, then we will be able to pass the inspection. And so that's what we did. We rerouted those pipes, and we were able to finally sell the property. So you want to make sure that you budget, and make sure you leave yourself cushion for any particular things that may possibly happen. You never want anything to happen and you not be prepared financially. So the next thing is overlooking the location factors. So location. Once you determine the particular property that you want to possibly flip, you want to consider the location of the property. Not all property is good to flip. It may not be in the best area. It may not be near a school. It may be an area that is in a flood zone. It may be in an area where people just are not buying. So you want to take your time, take a look at the different comps in the area, and not only look at the different comps in the area, but you want to also consider how many sales are going on in the area. Now, keep in mind that if the market is already slow in and of itself, that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't go in that particular area. It's just that the market is slow and that it might just be a buyer's market. So you want to actually think about the location, consider where it is. I will tell you another story about what happened. I had another particular property, and I thought that this property was a good property because it was near a good school, one of the best schools actually. And it was not in a flood zone, but it just so happened to be in an area where it was slow in terms of a lot of people didn't actually sell in that area, and a lot of people actually did not buy. So that one stayed on the market for about 2 months, which is not too bad, but my properties typically don't sit particularly long. And that is one of the things that I learned from that particular property, that, okay, you have to consider the location. It was not too far from a highway. It wasn't close enough where they can hear the busyness of the highway, but needless to say, it wasn't that far from a highway. And so I needed to keep that in mind. And another thing about that particular property is that I didn't have enough room in the profit. So I think I bought the property for $115,000, and it appraised for, I think it was like $180,000. So the numbers were just too tight in order for me to, it was just a minimal amount of work. But you also have to keep in mind that it may sit on the market a little bit longer. There may be some other issues during inspection that you may have to go back and fix. And so location is going to be very important in determining where you want to do your flip. The next option is overpricing the after retail value. If you are paying or going with a bank, or whenever the property is appraised, then it will be appraised for a certain amount. So before you actually purchase the property, you want to first find out how much the property actually appraises for. If you purchase the property without finding out how much it appraises for, you may overvalue what you think that you may make from the particular property. For example, you may see a particular property, it's in a good area, it's not in a flood zone, a lot of people are buying in that particular area, and you may think that the comps are $175,000 without doing your research. Well, you flip the house, you do your renovations, and you determine that the property is only worth $150,000. So you have that gap that's there. So you not only have lost if you put a lot into it in terms of your renovation costs, but you've lost in terms of not making as much profit as you're thinking that you're going to make. So do not overvalue a particular property. Always get it appraised. Always look at the comps. Always consider if it does not sell. The numbers actually have to make sense. Make sure that you do your calculations, and there's plenty of calculators, flipping calculators that's online, and that will allow you to evaluate your property. Another flipping mistake is to rush renovation process. Do not rush the renovation process. Even though you may have given yourself 6 months, even though you may have given yourself a specific time frame, you still don't want to rush the process. What could possibly happen is if you cut corners here or there and allow your carpenters to halfway do something, or if you're doing the work yourself and you halfway do it, then you run the risk of rushing, because it may cost you later, it may cost you a sale. Whenever a person is purchasing the property, they will 9 times out of 10 receive or obtain an inspection. During the inspection time is typically when things are found. So you might as well do it right first so that you don't have to redo it. Next step is marketing and staging your property. I have not staged every particular property that I flipped, but I've made sure that it's clean. I've made sure that if I decide to put it on the real estate market, that whatever realtor that I get, that they will take very good pictures, that they will have a professional photographer, that they will have a virtual tour as well. And that can actually make a huge difference in marketing your property. Talk to a realtor. A realtor will know the different stagers that are in the area, or the ones that they would recommend, and you can use those particular stagers to stage your property. Staging is not always mandatory, or staging is not always necessary. I think I've only staged one particular property, and that particular property did just as well as the other properties, and I didn't see a huge difference. So it just depends on the particular property that you have. If it's more of an upscale home, then you may consider doing staging. If it's not, then it's just simply having it cleaned will be fine as well. Not understanding holding costs is another issue that you may have, or another mistake to avoid. Insurance, mortgage payments, utilities, all of those are considered to be holding costs, but you want to make sure that you include your holding costs whenever you're considering doing a flip. So before you actually purchase the property, you want to make sure that you include that in your budget. Overextending your financial resources is another issue. Having too much debt or not enough capital reserves can also hurt your budget, or can also hurt your flip. Make sure that you have a strong financial buffer in order to accommodate any expenses that you may incur that's over budget. Having a contingency plan is another issue or another mistake to avoid. I always give myself at least 6 months in order to try and market the property. First of all, I always try and market the property myself to avoid realtor fees and additional costs. But if I do have to put it on the market and it still doesn't sell, then I make sure that whenever I first crunch my numbers, that I always have a contingency plan, and that contingency plan is that I have to be able to rent it. And so that particular property has to be where whatever the rents are in that particular area, that I can still rent it out and still make money on the particular property. The next mistake to avoid whenever flipping property is to keep in mind that there are legal considerations. So you make sure that you check in the area against any ordinances or any particular issues that may be in a particular area that you are going to be flipping in. There may be some HOA rules and regulations. And if you go and paint the house pink, for example, and they say that you can't paint it pink, then you may have some issues. I'll never forget, in my parents' neighborhood, actually, there was a house. It's a beautiful house, and I grew up on this particular street for years. You know, it was just a beautiful house. And so it was a couple of doors down from my parents' house. And so the person passed away, and their children ultimately sold the property. But the person who purchased the property and was able to get it at a good deal, apparently, because, you know, that particular person who lived there just kind of let it go down. And so they were able to get it at a good price. But little did they know that it was a historic house. It was on the Historic National Registry. And they went in and had torn everything up and, you know, redoing the roof and redoing this and that. And the Historical Society, or whomever it was, came by and they said that they had to stop. It's not funny, but it's, you know, something to think about, because none of us even knew. I mean, like I said, I grew up on the street. I didn't know. And so needless to say, they had spent all this money on this particular house, and it was a historic house. And they could not make certain changes to the house. They had to preserve like the flooring and preserve the type style of roof that was on there. I think the people were trying to put like a metal roof on there, and they were not allowed to do that. So you want to check your local ordinances. You want to check with your local government. You want to check with your zoning department in your area to make sure that, in particular, that it's not in a historic district, or that there are certain things that you cannot do or can do on the property before you actually spend the money. So like and subscribe on my channel. If you have any questions, or if you have any particular topics that you would like me to mention, then feel free to drop them down in the comments. Please visit my website at housefliptoolkit.com. Thanks for watching.